Around 1200 BC, one of the most advanced and interconnected worlds of the ancient past began to collapse with shocking speed. Within just a few decades, palace after palace across the eastern Mediterranean was destroyed by fire or abandoned. Writing systems disappeared. Trade networks that had linked entire regions for centuries suddenly collapsed. This was the Bronze Age collapse. In this video, we will briefly show you the destruction of these great palaces and the world that disappeared with them. Mycenae was one of the most powerful centers of the late Bronze Age world. Behind its massive Cyclopean walls and the monumental Lion Gate stood a complex palace that controlled large territories. From here, rulers managed agriculture, craft production, and the distribution of goods. For generations, Mycenae projected strength and authority across the region, standing as a symbol of Mycenaean power at its height. At Pylos, the Palace of Nestor served as a major administrative center of the Mycenaean world. From here, officials carefully managed agriculture, craft production, and the redistribution of goods across a wide territory. Hundreds of linear B tablets found in the palace record detailed information about grain, olive oil, livestock, and personnel. This was not just a royal residence. It was a complex system of control that organized the economic life of the entire region. Tiryns was one of the most heavily fortified Mycenaean centers. Its enormous Cyclopean walls, built from massive limestone blocks, were so impressive that later Greeks believed only giants could have constructed them. Some of these blocks weigh several tons. The fortress controlled the surrounding plain and stood as one of the strongest strongholds of the Mycenaean world during the 13th century BC. Further east stood Hattusa, the capital of the Hittite Empire. This heavily fortified city was one of the great power centers of the late Bronze Age. From its massive walls and monumental gates, the Hittite kings controlled much of Anatolia and played a major role in the politics of the Eastern Mediterranean. For centuries, Hattusa stood as a symbol of imperial strength, until it too was abandoned during the same wave of collapse that swept the region. On the Syrian coast, the city of Ugarit flourished as one of the most important trading centers of the late Bronze Age. Its harbor connected the great powers of the Eastern Mediterranean. Ships carried copper, tin, timber, oil, and luxury goods through its port. For centuries, Ugarit thrived on this international commerce, until the city was violently destroyed around 1190 BC and never recovered. At Troy, a well-fortified city stood in a strategic position near the entrance to the Dardanelles. In the 13th century BC, it was a significant regional center of the late Bronze Age. Strong stone walls protected a densely built citadel with houses, storerooms, and workshops. Large storage jars found inside the buildings show that the city managed substantial resources. For generations, Troy controlled an important position in the trade and politics of the Eastern Mediterranean. One of the most important centers to fall was the palace at Pylos. Around 1200 BC, it was destroyed by a massive fire. Whether the blaze was the result of an attack, internal conflict, or the chaos of the wider collapse remains uncertain. What is clear is the result. The once carefully organized complex of storerooms, workshops, and halls was left in ruins. Charred beams, collapsed walls, and thick layers of ash. More than 1,000 linear B tablets were found at Pylos, the largest collection on the Greek mainland. The fire that destroyed the palace accidentally baked the clay tablets, preserving detailed records of the palace administration. Tiryns was one of the most heavily fortified centers of the Mycenaean world. Its cyclopean walls, built from enormous limestone blocks, were so massive that later Greeks believed only giants could have constructed them. Around 1200 BC, the citadel suffered major destruction. Although the exact cause remains uncertain, the once dominant stronghold was left heavily damaged and never regained its former power. Inside the massive walls of Tiryns are long vaulted galleries built with corbelled arches. These passages were likely used for storage or as protected spaces during a siege. Mycenae, the most famous of the Mycenaean centers, also suffered serious destruction in the same period. The great citadel, with its monumental lion gate and massive walls, had stood as a symbol of power for generations. Archaeological evidence shows clear signs of fire and damage around 1200 BC. After this, the complex palace system that had controlled the region collapsed and was never fully restored. Further east, the great Hittite capital of Hattusa was sacked and largely abandoned. For centuries, this city had been the center of a powerful empire that dominated much of Anatolia. Its massive walls and monumental gates once projected strength across the region. The exact reasons for its fall remain uncertain, but around the same time as the destructions in Greece, Hattusa, too, was left in ruins and deserted. At the Lion Gate, two massive stone lions still guard the entrance. Carved directly from the limestone blocks of the gateway in the 13th century BC, they were meant to ward off evil and display the power of the Hittite kings. Even in ruin, they remain one of the most striking symbols of the lost empire. In 1833, the French archaeologist Félix-Marie Charles Texier was sent on an exploratory mission to Turkey, where in 1834 he discovered monumental ruins near the town of Boğazköy. On the Syrian coast, the wealthy trading city of Ugarit met a sudden and violent end. Around 1190 BC, the city was destroyed by fire. Letters found in the ruins speak of enemy ships appearing off the coast and desperate calls for help that never arrived. Unlike many other centers, Ugarit was never rebuilt. The city that had once connected the great powers of the Bronze Age simply disappeared. This is one of the entrances to the royal palace of Ugarit. The palace was a vast complex of nearly 90 rooms, with thick defensive walls, courtyards, archives, and storage areas. From here, the kings of Ugarit managed one of the most important trading cities of the late Bronze Age. This Mycenaean ceramic vessel was imported to Ugarit in the 14th to 13th century BC. Objects like this show the close trading connections between the Mycenaean world and the Syrian coast. Ugarit was a true crossroads of the late Bronze Age, where goods and styles from Greece, Cyprus, Egypt, and Anatolia met. At Troy, the archaeological layer known as Troy 7A was destroyed around 1180 BC. Excavations revealed clear signs of a violent end. Widespread fire, collapsed buildings, and bronze arrowheads embedded in the ruins. Houses inside the citadel were crowded with large storage jars, as if the population had prepared for a prolonged siege. Many scholars believe this destruction is connected to the historical events that later inspired the legends of the Trojan War. The city that stood at the edge of the Bronze Age world fell during the same period of collapse that swept across the eastern Mediterranean. Across large parts of Greece, the use of linear B writing stopped completely. The clay tablets that once recorded taxes, inventories, and the daily business of the palaces were no longer produced. An entire system of administration simply vanished. Long-distance trade that had linked the entire eastern Mediterranean also collapsed. Ships that once carried copper from Cyprus, tin, oil, and luxury goods no longer sailed. The complex economic network that supported the palace societies simply fell apart. The Mycenaean palaces were not just royal residences. They functioned as complex administrative and economic centers. From these buildings, officials controlled agriculture, collected taxes in the form of grain, oil, and livestock, managed workshops, and redistributed resources across the surrounding territories. When the palaces fell, this entire system of organization disappeared with them. Paleoclimate evidence from cave speleothems and pollen records shows periods of severe drought across the eastern Mediterranean in the late 13th and early 12th centuries BC. Reduced rainfall, damaged harvests, and placed heavy pressure on the palace-controlled food systems. For societies that depended on stable agriculture, these dry years became a serious and growing threat. Bronze was the essential metal of the age, but it could not be made without tin. Copper was relatively available, especially from Cyprus. Tin, however, was rare and had to be brought from distant regions through long trade routes. When those routes collapsed, the supply of tin was cut off. Without it, producing strong weapons and tools became much more difficult, adding severe pressure to societies that were already under stress. Egyptian records from the time of Pharaoh Ramesses III describe large-scale attacks by groups known as the Sea Peoples. These were not one single nation, but several different peoples moving by both land and sea. The detailed stone reliefs at Medinet Habu clearly showed their distinctive ships and warriors wearing feathered headdresses. Egypt managed to stop them, but the same movements helped destabilize other regions. While the Sea Peoples were not the only cause of the collapse, they added serious pressure to an already fragile world. After the collapse, life in Greece changed dramatically. The great palace centers were gone. In their place appeared small, simple villages with modest houses. Writing disappeared for centuries, long-distance trade declined, and society became far less complex. This period is known as the Greek Dark Ages. Yet the memory of the earlier world did not disappear completely. For centuries after the collapse, stories of powerful kings, great wars, and long, difficult journeys across the sea continued to be told. Passed down orally through generations, these traditions later formed the foundation of the legends we know from the Iliad and the Odyssey. For centuries, these stories were passed down orally. Only much later, around the 8th century BC, were they written down. Most scholars believe that the legends preserved in the Iliad and the Odyssey contain distant memories of the rich and dangerous world that existed before and during the Bronze Age collapse. The Bronze Age collapse remains one of the most dramatic turning points in ancient history. In just a few decades, a complex and interconnected world of palaces, writing, and long-distance trade came to an end. What followed was a long period of simpler societies and oral traditions that eventually gave rise to the legends of the Iliad and the Odyssey. It is a powerful reminder of how fragile even the most advanced systems can be.